Hello, everyone. I am here with Jim McClellan from Ford System, and I'm excited for this conversation for several reasons. First of all, Jim has a background with Japan, and I'm a big fan of a bunch of Japanese philosophies. They created so many that impacted companies and us, human, all around the world. We'll hear from Jim about his experience with Japan. Second, he is working with a lot of wine companies, and I am a big fan of that beverage. So we'll talk about that. And of course, e-commerce. He works with e-commerce businesses, which is something that we have passion for as well, together with my wife. So without any further ado, Jim, if you could introduce yourself and the company you represent, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks very much, Matt. So I'm Jim McClellan, and I'm with Fort Systems, which is a company that my partner Scott and I co-founded about 25 years ago. It's been a while. It still, in a number of ways, feels like a startup, but we really can't use that excuse anymore. We've been around for way too long for that. Uh, but yeah, so we're a SaaS platform, and we are focused on fulfillment, shipping and fulfillment, mainly for the beverage alcohol industry, and specifically for wineries and for wine product. Wine, as you may know, is particularly complicated to ship. It's a highly regulated product. Each state has the right to determine whether and under what specific conditions wine can be shipped across state lines into their own state on a direct-to-consumer basis. So our software manages all of that process for the wineries and for 3PLs, or third-party logistics companies. So our core clients fall into roughly two groups. One is 3PLs, that is to say, companies that store wine and ship it out on behalf of multiple clients. Most of those clients are wineries. And the other group of clients is wineries themselves. We work with an increasingly sort of high number of wineries directly, wineries that either need their own WMS or just ship some or even all of their own direct-to-consumer packages themselves.
Love it. And I can only imagine many other complexities when it comes to shipping and handling wine, because there is different temperature environment that you need to create for those when you transport, when they arrive. And also, if you are into wines, and I've spoken to many wine experts from Europe as well, from France and from Italy. So I know that if you're working with smaller wineries, for them, one batch, if something goes bad, can mean no food or literally no food on the table for another season. Because when there is bad weather conditions, there's many years where they have very, very small amount of good wine they are comfortable selling. So if something would go wrong during the transportation on or delivery, I can only imagine how big of an impact this might have on the company and overall, then obviously their families associated with that, because it's a hard work to work in that space. It's not easy, but we live actually in a beautiful state of California, where we had multiple wine countries, if you can call it as well. Are you working with wineries all over California, all over the world? I know we have, starting here, Temecula. If you go up north towards you, there's a three or four different wine countries. So what's the
Yeah,
demographics that you work with, or the
yeah.
geographic?
Most of the wineries that we work with are, in fact, based in California. California overwhelmingly has the highest number of wineries in the entire country. But it's important to also to note that all 50 US states have at least one, in fact, at least two wineries in them. So
Really?
there are wineries in every single US state, including Alaska, Hawaii.
Within New York?
Yeah, well, New York is actually one of the major wine producing states, believe it or not. Yeah, there are many wineries in New York, and they're producing world-class wine in New York, as well as Texas. The wineries in Texas, and the quality of the wine has just gotten incredibly good. So there's world-class wine being produced in Texas, New York, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and then obviously California, Oregon, Washington. There are great wines being produced here as well, but it goes up into Canada as well. But most of the wineries that we work with are US wineries. We do work indirectly with some overseas wineries, mainly through our clients. Those overseas wineries have their wine stored at a facility in America, for example, and they're shipped out from a facility that uses our software.
There is a place here in the Coachella Valley where they do, I guess I can call it, maybe you will know the better term for it, or professional term, an actual term, a wine concierge. storage system where there's a lot of people here in the desert. That's the off season just started because we entered high 110s plus. So it goes all the way to 124, 25 last couple of years, and it stays until October pretty much. So it's very hot. A lot of people leave and the desert, but they come here because they're retired or they're billionaires and they want to play golf and tennis here in beautiful Coachella Valley, where for 8 months of the year we have really nice weather, and it's a very dry climate. So they come here and they have a lot of expensive wines, and all those Petrus wine bottles have to be stored somewhere. And because they leave their home for 4 or 5 months here, they essentially give it to the concierge, and the concierge is responsible for those expensive bottles, make sure that their environment is correct, the wine doesn't go bad, and obviously the bottles will not be hurt. And when they come back, they can either pick up the wines, or they will deliver the wines back to their home cellars, or they will deliver individuals bottle to the restaurants if you want to make even a better, I guess, experience, create a better experience for you and your friends when you have delivered $1,000 or $2,000 bottle directly to your steakhouse. So that's
Pretty
something that
nice.
stuck with me, like that. How many different niched businesses you can have in
Yes.
so many spaces.
Yeah, there are a number of companies that offer services like that. Even back when we started our company over 20 years ago, there were specialized wine storage facilities that offered that, sort of white glove level of concierge service where they've got very sophisticated systems now. Everything's online. So a wine collector could basically log in from home and see exactly what their inventory is, and then request a bottle or certain bottles to be removed from storage and to be made available for pickup or to be delivered to their home or their business or whatever. So it's a business that's in quite high demand for those that need it, which is to say high-end wine collectors where they understand the need to have their wine stored at a constant, 55 degrees or whatever it is, right? And not everyone has a personal cellar which they can maintain, that sort of constant temperature. So
So that can happen for sure. And I heard some stories. What happens when for example, a housekeeper would come in and see some random bottles and just hit them with something by mistake, and then ended up being a very expensive wine from Bordeaux or somewhere else. Take us back to 1999 or around that time. What happened? What made you start Ford Systems and or co-found the company? And was it from the very beginning the focus on the wine industry as far as like warehousing fulfillment goes, or what happened back then?
yeah, it's a good question. We could, in fact, devote the entire time of this podcast to that question. But to distill it down to the essence of it, my business partner, who was a classmate of mine in graduate school back in New York City, he was living in LA at the time, and I was living in Tokyo. I was working for a big personal care products company. I was in brand management, and he had arranged to have a number of samples of an alcoholic beverage. It was like a wine to be sent to people around the world. And he realized right away how complicated and difficult and incredibly expensive it was to do that. And so we saw in that problem an opportunity, or he saw it, and then he spoke to me about it, and I agreed to jump in and start this company with him. And the opportunity was to make that much more efficient, to make the act of sending wine to someone else in another part of the world much easier. So our initial foray into the wine industry was not what we're doing today. It was really, you could call it the first step along the journey of trying to make the wine industry more efficient. And that first step was a wine gift service, rather like FTD, where you can walk into a florist in LA and arrange to have a dozen roses sent to someone who lives in Paris. What's sent to Paris is not the product itself, it's the order data. And so the order gets sent to the florist in Paris. The Parisian florist takes 12 roses from his or her inventory and delivers them to the recipient. Well, we created the same thing for wine, and it's called 800 Wine, rather like 800 Flowers. And that business, it actually survived for 10 or 12 years, but we quickly realized that it would need a massive advertising and marketing budget to really scale to the level that we had envisioned. And so after realizing that, however, we didn't just scrap our business plan for the wine industry, because that experience gave us a front row seat to what the real problem was in the industry, or one of the problems, I should say. And that problem was the fact that wineries here in the United States could not ship their own product directly to consumers in a very large number of states. The interstate shipping restrictions were massive. And so wineries, there were a handful of states that they could legally ship to. But if you lived at that time in, like, say, New York or Virginia or North Carolina or Florida or Ohio or a number of other states, you could not have wine from California shipped directly to you. The only way to make it legal was to have it shipped through the three-tier system. Three-tier meaning producer, wholesaler, retailer. So we saw that again as an opportunity. And we said we could create a clearing system, which would make it appear to the consumer in New York that the wine is being shipped directly from a winery in California. But really behind the scenes, what was happening is that that wine was being sold to an NRD or a non-registered dealer who would sell it to a wholesaler in New York, who would then sell it to a retailer in New York, who then would sell it to the final consumer in New York. All of that was made seamless and invisible by our software, but we managed that paper trail. We managed the product, the data, title, and so that's how we really got into the nuts and bolts of the wine industry, is through that clearing system. That clearing system, which we called World ShipNet, it grew and it lasted for 15 or 16 years. We don't do it anymore, and the reason is because the almost all U.S. states now allow the direct shipment of alcohol. But in exchange for the right to ship wine there, the states have specific tax regimes. So you pay as a winery for the right to ship your wine directly to a consumer. It's not all 50 states, but most states allow direct to consumer shipping in some form. So we don't need that clearing system for that purpose. The need for that clearing system is what really got us into the logistics side of the wine industry. And from there, we built out our what is now our core platform, which is our WMS, our warehouse management system for wine shipping entities. And that really got us to where we are today.
I love how you saw opportunity in every problem or obstacle. That's the main
Well,
characteristic.
I wish I could see opportunity in every problem, but I don't. That particular problem, we saw opportunity in, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. And front row seat is a fantastic phrase that I have to write down. I'm a big fan of phrases like that, and I have a full library of them, trying to memorize and use them when it's appropriate. So thank you for that. I know you have a background in teaching English in Japan. We'll get to that in a second. So
Yeah.
thank you for that phrase. I have a question regarding the growth of a company with yours. So I can imagine a winery would come in and they start growing and they will have more and more orders. That means they need more and more of your services. And I can imagine you would be able to retain clients for accounts. I'm not sure how you name that, for a long time. But what's the total addressable market audience for your company? You've mentioned that in every state, which is a surprise to me, every state has some wineries. Obviously, in California, I mean, in Temecula, we have 50 or 51 right now, and I've seen only half of them. So I can imagine California, you have maybe a couple hundred of them. And then California is the biggest state, I believe, when it comes to wine world. So what's the total addressable market audience, and how do you see the next, 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. There are actually many more wineries in the U.S. than you would think. The number goes up every time I check, but it's around 12,000 now.
Whoa,
Yeah,
12,000?
and most of those are in California. A fair chunk of that 12,000 are virtual wineries, which is to say they aren't physical wineries. They do custom crush. They don't own, the estate or vineyards. They basically buy grapes and they do the custom crush and they have it bottled and then they store it at a warehouse where they just pay for the storage and then they sell it either directly or through the three-tier system. So there are a lot of wineries out there, and it was growing and growing and growing for years. I would suspect that that growth will probably slow down or maybe even start to dip because we have so many wineries now. But a lot of those wineries are focused on the D2C market, the direct to consumer,
Right.
which is of course obviously more profitable for them than selling through the three-tier system. When you sell wine through the three-tier system, like let's say the wine is a $20 bottle at your local Albertsons or Safeway, right? Very roughly speaking, what that means is the FOB price, or the price at which the winery sells it to the wholesaler, typically is around 50% of that. So the winery has sold that bottle of wine for, let's say, $9 or $10 to the wholesaler. The wholesaler has sold it for, 13 or 13.50 or so to the retailer, and the retailer then sells it to you for 19 or $20. That channel is the one with the high volume for sure, but the profit margins are greatly reduced from a direct to consumer sale. So a lot of wineries are really focused on the direct to consumer market, and that's really largely what our software focuses on, is wineries that want to ship their product directly to consumers and want to do it as efficiently as possible.
And I just remembered because you've mentioned New York has a lot of wines, and then I remember a gentleman named Gary V. Gary Vaynerchuk. He should be a good connection. Could be a good connection for you because he's he himself, I believe, his dad is still in the wine business and then selling lots of wines. I mean, he mentioned that when he grew the company around the time you started, I believe, was 2 decades, over 2 decades ago. They reached like
Yes.
8 figures in annual sales or something like that. It was a
Yeah.
big number.
He's done an amazing job, has had some great innovative ideas, and is, I think, widely respected throughout the industry for sure.
So there's definitely a lot more wineries. I calculated if Temecula is the smallest wine region in California, maybe you will have 150 Napa or in Paso Robles or some other regions, but 12,000, that's a decent total addressable market audience. So I can imagine there's a growth for you for the next decade or two, alone with getting more accounts on working with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, although it leads to an important consideration for us, right? So the direct to consumer segment of the wine industry has been growing for a long time, will likely continue to grow or at least stabilize. The wine industry as a whole is slowing down a little bit, has over the past year. We'll see what happens in the next 5 or 10 years, but um, that for a small company like us who focus on a segment of the business that isn't necessarily limited to beverage alcohol, right? Our software, we do focus on a very difficult product to ship. But we like to think that if you can enable a compliant and efficient and seamless shipment of wine from point A to point B, you can enable the shipment of any product, because shipping wine is so complicated and so laden with complexity and regulatory burdens and hurdles. So we've spent years building out this platform that enables wine to be managed and shipped seamlessly. So that would suggest that perhaps we can look at adjacent industries. By adjacent, I mean products that you can't just ship from one person to another. There's some degree of regulatory complexity, like medical devices or pharmaceuticals or things like that. But really, any product can be shipped in the Fort platform. So we are always keeping our eyes open for opportunities. Cannabis, obviously, is one. Here in California, it became a big industry a few years ago, and
2018, I believe, when it
yeah, and so we're staying away from that for now because it's still a Schedule One drug, and so therefore it's at the federal level it's illegal. You can't ship from California to Nevada or any other state. But if and when interstate shipping becomes legal for cannabis, that is a natural market for us to look at, because my suspicion is that, again, if it becomes legal to ship interstate, it will look a lot like interstate shipment of wine does today, because what will happen is states will have the right to decide whether they're going to allow interstate shipments of cannabis on a direct-to-consumer basis into their state. And if they do allow it, surely they will say, here's the deal. You can ship to consumers in this state, but the tax rate is going to be X, and maybe excise tax will be Y, and then the annual renewable permit is going to be Z. And so managing all of that is going to be different by state, just as it is in the wine industry. But we will, add all of that logic into our system and be able to manage that for cannabis suppliers and shippers.
It's even more optimistic than I thought, but it's definitely a lot of opportunities there. And in cannabis, we actually had a CBD brand back a couple of years back, and there's a lot of problems with shipping CBD itself. So forget about cannabis containing THC content. However, I have friends in the industry, in the advertising industry, and in the e-commerce space that started a beverage that has some limited traces of THC, and they have CBD and also those nootropic mushrooms like the lion's mane, and they are growing extremely fast. I've yet to experience a growth like that, rapid growth. They went from 0 to 5 million plus per month in sales, selling cans. So it's similar to, obviously not in a bottle, but it's a can. So it requires, essentially what I'm trying to say is that they need a system. Their fulfillment partner has to be extremely prepared for growth, and because they had to deliver quickly, obviously, and it requires special treatment, like you said, from the paperwork, from the software, from the
Right.
management, from the forecasting as well, because they're growing. Their growth is almost sounds like linear, where it's just going like that. So we can almost predict what's going to happen next month, and they've been pretty good with their predictions from the founder's perspective. But that's another space where I've seen a lot of more beverages coming to the market. I mean, for many years we had Monsters, Red Bull, and few others. Now you have Celsius acquiring brands left and right because they're afraid of
Right.
having more competitors to outgrow them, and they won't be able to acquire them. So Red Bull and those. And then another opportunity could be those non-alcoholic. There's non-alcoholic wines as well,
Right.
and non-alcoholic tequilas, whiskeys, and those beverages that can probably be easy shipped in an easier way than those containing alcohol. And they usually come from big brands that have both alcoholic and non-alcoholic. So that's becoming a big industry. And I read somewhere when I was doing research, a study, maybe a white paper was it, where that the younger buyer trends in wine market. Is it going up or is it going down? Funny enough, yesterday evening, as I was going reading some articles, I saw a data that the new generation, which please forgive me, I can't remember all the names from Generation Z, X, Y, Z. The newest generation, they reach the age where they can purchase alcoholic beverages. They are, I think, purchasing that 20 or 25 times less than the previous generation, which would be my generation. And then forget about the previous generation, that's even higher. So it's interesting. What's your take on that? Have you observed it as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly read that. My perspective won't be as informed as a lot of like brand managers or people that are actually on the production side that really need to focus on that. We are simply, we're focused on the logistics side of the business. So we aren't so focused on the consumer profile. But yes, you're correct, and at least what you're saying is very consistent with what I'm reading in the wine industry press about younger consumers. I've certainly seen that there's a far lower likelihood that a young person will order wine or beer, go to a bar and have some alcoholic drink. They're much more likely to, surprisingly, to some extent, they're more likely to, if they do drink, to have some spirit, like vodka or gin or whiskey or something. But yeah, there is definitely a slowdown in the desire to have a drink of alcohol among the younger cohort.
We need more Slavic people in the world.
Yeah, yeah, right. And I think perhaps part of that is, due to the availability of cannabis products and gummies and things like that. But yeah, the non-alcoholic segment of the industry, as you probably know, is a very fast-growing segment in alcohol. In fact, it might be the fastest growing segment. Certainly, I think that's true of the beer market. And non-alcoholic wine is also growing, but don't think it's growing as fast as the beer non-alcoholic segment. And this is just my personal opinion, but I've had a number of non-alcoholic wines, and it's the problem, the challenge for a non-alcoholic wine producer is that it's very hard to create. When you have a glass of great wine, there's this fullness and complexity and balance to the wine that is really unique to wine. When you have a glass of non-alcoholic wine, it just plain tastes like grape juice. I
I
mean,
was
there's
about to
no
say it
alcohol in
just
it, and
tastes
it's
like grape
really
juice.
hard to get around that. It's like, how do you create a really robust, rich taste experience without the alcohol when you're drinking wine? It's a really tough challenge. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's really hard. And the non-alcoholic wines that I've had taste like really wonderful, delicious grape juice. And so I am really, it would be very unlikely for me to spend $20 or $30 on a bottle of non-alcoholic wine for that reason. Non-alcoholic beer, on the other hand, it's come a long way. And I actually drink non-alcoholic beer on a regular basis. I love I've come to love the taste of non-alcoholic beer. It doesn't have the same burn as a real alcoholic beer, but it's the flavors are delicate and they're nuanced, and it's very satisfying. When you feel like a beer, I've actually learned to really appreciate a non-alcoholic beer. But I think wine still has a ways to come when it comes to that. Spirits have surprised me, the non-alcoholic spirits. The flavors they've been able to achieve are amazing. And they actually, with some of the blends of herbs and spices and like peppermint, like, hints and sort of medicinal aromas and flavors, you add a little bit of that to some sparkling water, and you have a very, adult tasting, satisfying, beverage, even though it has no alcohol. So the appeal for spirits I can also see and appreciate, as with beer, as I said. But wine, yeah, well, I'm hoping that over the next few years, non-alcoholic wine options become a little bit more, rich and varied.
I agree with you on all three aspects or three genres of beverages, non-alcoholic beverages. Beer is the closest to a regular beer as you can get.
Yeah.
Wine is a grape juice, pure, and then there is some good tequilas or whiskeys that, with the spices, like you said, come close to it. And we came to explore those beverages when we were doing the 75 hard challenge. And I'm not sure if you heard about that, but for 75 days, you can't drink any alcohol. You have to work out twice a day, once outside, once indoor, and you have to read for a certain amount of pages for 10 days and for 10 minutes or whatever. And that lasts for 75 days. So after about 2 months, less than 2 months, we had to find some alternatives with my wife because we did it together, and we started trying all those beverages. And I agree with you, and beer would be probably the only one that I would like fully accept. And it gives the flavor is comes very, very close, and they're promoted across. I feel like they promote more the big advertisers like soccer, like I believe basketball, and then American football, and in Europe all the soccer events and World Cups, Euro Cup. They promote more non-alcoholic beers than regular beers now. So it's becoming, it obviously impacts the whole
That's
industry, and
great.
it's coming along for sure. Now let's touch on the Japan aspect of it. How did you end up in Japan? And you've mentioned being in the advertising space as well in Japan. Oh, and you've worked with
Yeah.
corporations in Japan. So what's the story there?
Yeah, Japan is another topic that I could gladly spend a full podcast or multiple podcasts talking about. But in my particular case, when I was graduating from college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I had a job offer as an editorial assistant at a publishing company. And I thought, well, maybe before I settle down into some job like that, I'll travel around a little bit and, experience the world. And so I got this job in Japan. I interviewed for it down in Washington, D.C., and it was a very short term. It was a 4-month job at a Japan government sponsored institute right at the foot of Mount Fuji. And so it sounded like this exotic place, and I had never been to Japan. I thought, wow, what a cool opportunity this is. And so I, luckily was hired for the job, and got there and thought I would just, do the job for 4 months and then keep traveling for a little bit and come back to the States and get a proper job. What happened though was, and as you say, I was hired as an English teacher, and I was teaching mainly Japanese government officials and business executives English. So I loved Japan, loved the job. I had a great time. And so after the job finished, I moved to Tokyo and I got a job at a very small advertising company. I didn't really speak Japanese. And so that was really fun trying to navigate my role in an advertising company without speaking the language. But I picked up a little bit of it. And then I stayed there for about 8 months. And then I came back to the States and went to graduate school in New York City, where I met my current business partner, and studied Japanese formally, studied the language, studied, the economy, history, and then within the context of an overall international affairs degree with a focus on business. And so when I graduated from grad school, I was hired by a big Japanese multinational consumer products company. Just coincidentally, and luckily for me, it was the first year that they had decided to hire non-Japanese people for their management training program. So I was literally ended up being the first person hired for that program. So my first 7 months of employment were at a subsidiary that company owned in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I learned sort of the rudiments of marketing and brand management. And then after that I moved to Tokyo, and I lived in the company dormitory along with all the other Japanese recruits. So it was not the expat lifestyle that a lot of, my classmates from graduate school had. My approach was the local Japanese approach. So I lived in the dormitory with the other Japanese, ate all my meals in the dormitory cafeteria with them, went through the same training and rituals in the first year or two of the company that they did. And also my first 6 months there was actually intensive study language training. So I learned a lot more Japanese than I was able to learn in graduate school. But so that was my career for 10 years. I stayed with the company. Most of my time was actually spent at headquarters in Tokyo, but I also spent about 3.5 years at the subsidiary in Cincinnati. I ended up going back to help with the launch of a body wash product, and then moved back to Tokyo again to focus more on product management and business development, mainly in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. So yeah, and that brought me up to the point where I decided to come back to the States and start this company with my partner. I actually have not read that particular series. I've read many books on Japan and many books on Japanese management style. And that, yet again, is a topic that we could spend a lot of time talking
I
about.
know.
I'm a big fan of it.
I believe the lean thinking, which might be one of the first ones, is talking about the Japanese system. And if I remember it correctly, I have to go through my notes. It was the example or the actual company where they implemented the lean thinking system, which is the Toyota way, in other words, that was brought to the United States later on. But some of the consultants that tried to kept it, the Japanese tried to kept the people and corporations tried to keep it secret. We start sending over the U.S. based American consultants to start essentially allow them to bring their products to the United States, but in exchange for some know-how, and that's how it started. And there, one of the examples that I remember was, I believe, a warehouse, so a warehousing system, where they implemented the lean thinking way. And if I remember correctly, the book is called Lean Thinking, which was one. There's a lean startup, lean thinking, lean something, essentially eliminating the waste, keeping what's important, almost like the Pareto rule, the 80-20, and
Yeah.
having a system that operates like clockwork without missing parts. And one thing from the Toyota way that stuck with me was that everyone at the production line had the had a capability of stopping the entire production if they found out a mistake, small or big, because they knew that even if this is the smallest mistake, it might escalate a year later, 6 months later, a decade later, and they want to prevent that from happening. So everyone at the production line had a capability or an option to stop the production line. And there's obviously a lot other strategies that they're covered in those books, but that's something that stuck with me from Japan. Outside of the philosophies like the kaizen philosophy and constant and never-ending improvement type of philosophy. And there's a few others like the Ichigo Ichi ikigai, finding your purpose and
Ikigai.
defining what's worth for you to pursue.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that, and it's very consistent with the Japanese approach, with the best aspects of the Japanese approach, that endowing each member of the team with the power and the responsibility to make this the best product that they possibly can, knowing through your example as a management leader that every single team member is valued to the extent that any one of them sees something that can be perceived as a mistake that will snowball and escalate and become a more significant problem down the road. They have the ability to stop the production line or whatever it is and say, no, we have to address this now. But I love that. I mean, it truly makes every single member implicitly understand that their role is critical.
Well said. Better, much better version. I prefer your version to my version. It's you mentioned learning languages, and English is my third language, so I know how brains think
Impressive.
when there's too many languages in your brain. But I mean, too many. I began to study this year polyglots that were able to learn 5+ languages, and felt inspired by them, and definitely adding more to my skills. But it's taking more time the older I get, I guess.
No, that's impressive. I always am impressed with you know, most people from Europe who just put Americans to shame, and they're, talking about polyglots. I don't know what the average, person in Poland can speak. Your average, for example, Dutch person or Swedish person. I mean, they speak at least 3 languages, right? I mean, it really is impressive.
It's a great tool. I love it, and I hope that my daughter and future kids will be find the same passion for learning languages and words, love for words as I do. And I remember walking with a dictionary before the phones before the smartphones. The phones were around, obviously, but not smartphones, and I had to carry that big dictionary with me everywhere I went. So that's cool. I didn't understand what they're talking to me, so I had to translate at least few words so I can understand the context of what was said. That was always very, very good memories with that. But
Yeah, that's another really good question. For us, we are our kind of internal informal motto is just focused on fulfillment, and that's kind of a deliberate pun there. Fulfillment being the act of taking order data, packaging the products that are included in that order data, and then shipping it out most efficiently. That's fulfillment. But fulfillment also is, personal fulfillment. What, gives me meaning, what makes me feel like I have made a meaningful contribution. So we're focused on fulfillment in both of those ways at Fort. And we really, as you say, our North Star as continuing along the path of making fulfillment more and more seamless. Better ways of integrating with the various order management systems and the increasingly sophisticated and seamless ways of ordering that are available to consumers. We want to make sure that we always do our absolute best to be fully integrated, seamless, and as smooth as possible. And to what fulfillment and what our business, we say we're focused on logistics and shipping and fulfillment, but really on a day-to-day basis, what it's all about is addressing problems. Because problems come up all the time. There's always something wrong. There's always some unexpected thing that happens, some new hurdle, something breaks, And so it's constantly focusing on that and making that whole fulfillment path as smooth and as efficient and as ultimately rewarding for the consumer as we can possibly get.
great answer right there. And I can be sure the optimist for the next decade or the next season, if you will. I know the last 5 to 10 years were lots of ups and downs in the transportation and not only transportation industry, shipping industry, but any other industries as well in United States and in worldwide even. But I know that we still have to ship a lot of products, and we're going to manufacture a lot of products, and people want to have things faster than ever, almost immediately. So there's always some innovations that are welcomed in the industry and across industries that make our lives simpler and help us find fulfillment and pursue it. So, Jim, I know I had at least 5 other topics to cover, but we would spend here entire afternoon today. So hopefully, maybe down in the future, near future, we'll have another opportunity to sit down and talk about that. It was a pleasure to host you today. Thank you so much for all the insights you shared. And again, I look forward to seeing your company grow and faster than ever. The wine industry grow, the regular wine industry grow faster than ever. And please stay on for another minute. I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Matt. I really enjoyed speaking with you and getting to know you a little bit, and I would welcome the opportunity to speak with you again sometime in the near future.
Thank you. Arigato.